Sexual trauma has a profound impact on one's mental health, identity, relationships, and sexuality. Welcome to Normalize the Conversation. I'm your host, Francesca Reicheter, and today I'm joined by a certified sex therapist and licensed marriage and family therapist working with survivors of sexual trauma, Dr. Holly Richmond. In today's episode, we're exploring what sexual trauma is and how one can begin to rebuild trust and experience healthy relationships after trauma, as well as reclaim pleasure and find joy in sex post-trauma. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm super excited for our conversation, but before we begin, I just want to check in. How are you really?
I am good. Excited to be here and a little stressed out and tired. I have a parent who's been in the hospital, so that's hard. So I love the really question, but overall, I've been taking care of myself a little bit better this year. That was my commitment for 2024 was to have better boundaries and self-care in place, and that I feel like I've been pretty consistent with it. So overall, feeling better than last year.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for your honesty. It's so hard, I think, to be honest with how you're feeling. And when you're so excited to do something, like I love podcast recordings, but I have a grandmother who has Alzheimer's and she had a recent fall. So when I separate from her for a little bit, it feels really stressful. So I get that feeling stressed and excited. And I don't think people often get to see how much is behind the smiles that we're putting out there and the content.
Right, right. The masking and just our ability to hold two truths. So it can be true that I'm feeling better in my body than I have in a long time, and it can also be true that this is one of the more stressful times in my life recently because a parent is ill. Yeah,
Exactly. Both can coexist. But
yeah.
moving into our topic today, we're going to talk about sexual trauma and your work in helping people heal from sexual trauma. So before we begin, I was wondering if you could define what sexual trauma is.
I love this. I really appreciate that you led with this question. So I'm going to give just like a few quick examples of trauma or how I define it. But then, if it's okay with everyone, I just would like to read the paragraph from Reclaiming Pleasure, my book, specifically about sexual trauma. So you'll get kind of like an overlay and then the more clinical perspective. So, in my mind, sexual trauma is something that usually happens too fast, too soon. Sexual trauma is unpredictable. Sexual trauma is violating, not necessarily violent. So that last one I said is the really important one because I feel like the media has really projected an idea of sexual trauma that is not accurate. So what we've been told is for it to be bad, for sexual trauma to count, it's some form of stranger rape, right? So a lady's walking down the street and guy jumps out of the bushes, or someone's hiding in the backseat of the car, or we have bruises and bumps and scars to show for this how horrible it was. We know that that's not generally true. So I feel like we've been told that for sexual trauma to be bad enough, it's a stranger jumping out of the bushes or someone hiding in the backseat of our car, and we end up with a bump or bruises or cuts, and there's something to show for about it, to show for that makes it bad enough. And what we know in working in this space is most sexual trauma is not violent. It's just this idea of violating. So stranger rape accounts for about 19% of all sexual trauma. And in the clinical landscape, that would even be high. So most trauma that a clinician is going to treat is from a perpetrator that's known to the survivor. I've only taught, so let's say I have 20,000 hours of working with survivors under my belt at this point. I've probably only treated 4 or 5 stranger rape cases. So, I mean, the proportions are huge. So again, we don't need it to be violent for it to be violating. Sexual trauma is, so this is from my book, Reclaiming Pleasure, is a broad term that refers to one or multiple sexual violations of any kind that invoke significant distress. It is a term used clinically, though generally not legally or empirically, because it allows for a wider gradation of scope and ambiguity in labeling the experience. It also offers survivors, clinicians, supporters terminology for collectively understanding without stigmatizing, which can happen when details and descriptions are provided in a more exacting way. Using the term sexual trauma is an appropriate and accurate way to describe any unwanted sexual experience in a clinical or social setting. So the reason we're going to use sexual trauma is because if we use rape, sexual assault, sexual abuse, sexual harassment, gender violence, we get specific and we're more in the details there. So sexual trauma is an umbrella term. So if you are a survivor and you're like, I'm not comfortable saying I was sexually abused as a child, or that I was raped as an adult, or I was experienced sexual harassment, sexual trauma is absolutely legitimate.
Thank you so much for that definition. I love how you clarified that. It's feeling violated. I think a lot of people may feel invalidated by the idea of what the media portrays, right? Like it's just violence. And although that, like you said, it's been 19% of the cases, I think that knowing any experience that made you feel uncomfortable, that made you feel unsafe, that was unwanted, it's valid to be struggling with that. It's valid for that to be something that makes relationships maybe difficult for you or sexual experiences difficult for you. And there's not something wrong with you. You're not being dramatic. It's not that you were supposed to want it because you were in a relationship. It's not your fault. I think it's just so important to distinguish between sexual trauma, sexual abuse, rape. They're all valid.
Yes, they're absolutely all valid. And the other thing to add on to what you said, if you don't remember what happened to you, the specifics of what happened to you, what happened to you is still valid and it was bad enough. A lot of times, so with sexual abuse, so sexual abuse is generally anything with a minor or someone who can't physically consent because of developmental or physical disabilities. So they'll have something I called unstoried trauma. So they know that then when they see Aunt Jane, they feel profoundly uncomfortable. They want to throw up. They want to get away from her. They experience disgust. So there's like the inner knowing that something happened, but they don't have a story. They don't have a memory to put with it. So we still need to trust our bodies in that situation. The other example of when we're not going to have a memory to support that it was bad enough is if we were drinking or using drugs. And even if we chose to do that, or if we were overserved purposefully by someone who was trying to hurt us. So long way of saying you don't have to have a memory to have it qualify as sexual trauma either. Many of us have unstoried trauma where we know something bad happened, but we can't quite get the details clear in our head. And that's generally a protective process by our cognitive functioning.
Yeah. And it's so heartbreaking how many people don't listen to their bodies and don't trust themselves, right? You deserve to feel comfortable around people. And if you've ever been in an experience where something happened and you don't remember, you're not making it up. I think it's so easy for people to say, well, if you don't remember, you're making it up. You're being dramatic and you're looking for attention. And it's so important for people to realize that everything they're feeling and going through is valid and it can impact them in so many ways. And that's okay, but it doesn't have to stay like that. There is hope, there is healing available, and that's what you're helping people do. And I think that's just absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I absolutely love my job. This has been, I feel very blessed to work with survivors of all kinds, men, women, non-binary. The work is it's really getting ourselves out of shame and into that process of thriving. So you've been hearing me use the word survivor a lot. So just for your listeners who don't know, that's the language that I use that most people in a social justice construct are going to use instead of victim, because you can imagine how it would feel if I'm talking about you or talking to you and I keep saying, well, victims of sexual trauma do this, or you would be considered a victim if this and this. After a while, that's not going to hear so great. Like that's not a hopeful position to take. So we use the word survivor. The place where we will use victim is legally. So if there's a legal setting, a lot of times the language there will be victim, or if something horrible happened, the language there would be meaning the survivor didn't survive the experience. We would say victim of sexual violence.
I love that clarification. It's a lot more empowering to use the word survivor, knowing that there's hope that you're going to get through it, that it can get better. I think, like you said, victim doesn't, that can feel really disheartening and like it's never going to get better. So thank you for providing that clarification. I really want to talk more about how it impacts someone's mental health, how it impacts maybe someone's identity, future relationships, pleasure.
Yeah, that's a great question too. And I'm just flipping to chapter 6 in my book. So chapter 6 is called Uncovering Hidden Wounds. And this is probably my favorite chapter of all. And it's the one that resonates most with people because I go through the emotional, physical, relational, and sexual symptoms that a lot of people don't see. So when you hear me just read through some of these, almost every survivor, absolutely, actually, I can say this, every survivor of sexual trauma will find themselves in these symptoms somewhere. And the piece that's been so empowering here is for people that I work with to say, oh my gosh, I didn't know that was a symptom. I've been experiencing that since this happened to me. I just thought I was being dramatic, or I thought I was crazy, or I just hadn't made the connection between what happened to me and what I'm experiencing now. So one of the biggest issues with sexual trauma is, let's say it happened to us 15 years ago. We're here in the present moment, but there's so much of our body and our mind that is still stuck in the past. So a good trauma therapist is going to help you separate the past from the present. One of my favorite mantras is that was then, this is now. And if we get that on repeat, that was then, this is now, it just really lands us here, because anyone I'm working with, like you, Francesca, I can see like right now you are safe. I can see you, you're in, I don't know, an office or a bedroom and you're safe. There's nothing bad happening to you. But if we haven't processed our trauma, it still feels like something bad is happening to us. And we'll have these 4 quadrants of symptoms: emotional, physical, relational, or sexual, that are really flared up until we can address that. So I'm just going to give you a couple of the emotional. So alexithymia is the first one, and that means difficulty identifying emotions. So that's going to be someone who is pretty dissociated or disconnected from themselves. They won't know if they're angry or sad. They'll just kind of feel flat. Dysregulated emotions, feeling out of control, rumination, low self-esteem, lack of boundaries, feeling confused. One I hear a lot from survivors: feeling dead inside, fear of going crazy, and diminished ability to feel joy or relaxation.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. It really, really can impact you. Not can impact you, it really does impact you. And it's so important to get the support that you need and you deserve. I have a friend who is a survivor, and one thing that they said to me that really stuck with me is that when they engage in sexual experiences, they just dissociate. And they
Mhm.
know that they're supposed to do it because that's part of a relationship, but they're just not there. They don't enjoy it. They're just kind of like trapped in the moment and
Yeah, going
waiting
through the
for it to be
motion.
over with.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And just to normalize that, I can't tell you how many times I've heard that as well. So like a survivor is in a really loving partnership, and they want to have sex with their partner, but they don't want to at all. So they have sex out of duty or obligation. And then they say that they're like, I just wait for it to be over with.
Yeah, and it's heartbreaking because you deserve to have pleasure. You deserve to be able to feel good and safe and get to enjoy it. It shouldn't be taken from you.
Right. Right. Yeah. So the physical consequences, I just want to point out a few. There's going to be a lot around food and exercise. So survivors tend to go to body-based or somatic qualities to try to control how they feel. So eating disorders and sexual trauma go hand in hand. So someone that's either over exercising, binge eating, or under exercising and under eating. So all of those are possibilities. Poor body image. A lot of survivors will say, oh, I have a horrible memory. I can't remember anything. That's not a bad memory. That's just chronic anxiety. So anxiety overrides cognition. When we're chronically anxious, it's really hard to retain information. I love that you went to the sexual consequences. So yeah, there's going to be usually an aversion to sexuality most of the time. Sometimes though, there's a proclivity towards it. So some survivors will have more sex to try to make what happened to them meaningless, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. And I never thought about it that way as well. And it's so important to recognize that everyone copes with it differently. But is it possible to reclaim that pleasure and enjoy sex as a survivor?
Absolutely. Yeah. So this has been my work since 2009. Um, and through my dissertation, I ended up creating the Reclaiming Pleasure Protocol. So what I found in my dissertation were three distinct qualities that help us move from surviving to thriving. So help us move from just like getting through life and still experiencing these symptoms, some of which that you and I talked about, to really being able to be in the present moment, in our bodies, in connection with our partners. So what that protocol looks like, so it starts with control, and that probably sounds self-evident, but it's maintaining control and relinquishing control. And the relinquishing control is really more of the important piece there. So of course the survivor is going to want to control where she is and who she's sleeping with. Absolutely, makes sense. But can she relinquish control to really settle into her body, her deserving, her self-worth, knowing that her voice matters? Like the relinquishing control is really where that work lies. So I'll do a lot of work around control with people that I'm working with. The second piece is pleasure. This is the really exciting part of our work together. So I help survivors discover their sexual template, meaning most, especially women, have never really considered what they like in the bedroom. It's just, well, I'll just do whatever pleases my partner. So when we're looking at the sexual template, we're looking at desire, we're looking at arousal, we're looking at fantasy, we're talking about toys, if toys are something you need, we're talking about clitoral stimulation, penetration, all kinds of the body, non-genital touch. And I use a protocol called Sensate Focus to really go from very, very slowly, like baby steps of just getting you back in your body and feeling deserving to, if let's say penetration or anal sex is like your peak sexual experience that you want to work back towards, we would just do that in a really titrated way.
Well, thank you for going through those. But one thing that I love that you said was a lot of women never really have the chance to explore what they like. Sex education. Really, really. We hear all about masturbation for males, but there isn't really conversation for females growing up. At least that's not the kind of conversations we had in my schools. And it wasn't until, I want to say like 3 weeks ago, I'm doing my master's in clinical psychology and we're taking a sex therapy class. And that was the first time I heard a teacher talk about it. And that was amazing to me that the conversation was shifting for us, that it's not all about the male's pleasure.
Right. Yeah. And I'll be curious to see how much you get in your master's program, but I think my program is either 8 hours or 16 hours. Like that was it.
Yeah, we
And
got
then
16 hours.
yeah, then you're done. So for anyone who is interested in being a therapist or a psychologist, the sex therapy certification is another 300 hours on top of that. So there is so much to learn there. So I'm the associate director for Modern Sex Therapy Institutes, where we train sex therapists. It's such a rich program and such a rich field, and you can never learn it all. Just like you can never learn it all in psychology. I just happen to focus on sexual trauma. So I'm glad that you're getting 16 hours, and please go get more as well.
It's so important. And I wish that it was talked about that we could get certifications, that there's more education available because it's so important. First of all, it's important that we start this conversation younger so women don't feel that their bodies and pleasure all belongs to a male, right? And that they can have a bit of control in the experience and they can enjoy it as well. And I hope that as therapists, future therapists, we get more education and support so that we can help women or anyone figure out how to love themselves, how to derive pleasure, how to find pleasure, how to feel comfortable and safe in relationships, and for survivors, helping them to heal and be able to
Couldn't
regain
agree
that
more.
pleasure. Yeah. As a future therapist, I hope that we get more training so that we can help all individuals be able to explore their sexuality, explore what they like and don't like, how to feel comfortable, how to ask for consent or take away consent, how to have a voice. And for survivors, helping them to heal and overcome so that they can enjoy pleasure and relationships. It's so important. In 16 hours, it's just not.
No, it's not even close to enough. So what happens, so you would, not you, someone else in your program would come through and say, yay, I'm a therapist, I go to work, and I start seeing patients, and then someone walks in with sexual trauma or just wanting to talk about their sex life, and they freeze a little bit, and they feel like they're not qualified to talk about it. So then they need to make a referral to a sex therapist. If all therapists knew a little bit more about sexuality and didn't have their own shame around it, I wish they could talk more to their clients about it, because sexual health is part of our overall health. It's not like us and then our sexuality lives over here. Like we're one being, we're one sexual being. And it just, even when we go to the doctor, like most doctors don't address sexuality. The whole thing just needs to change.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, something that comes up is if I finally feel safe talking about it with someone. I think that there's a lot of stigma and shame talking about sex, talking about relationships and how you feel just in general. And when you finally feel safe to talk about it and the therapist is uncomfortable, that can make you super uncomfortable and then afraid to ever talk about it again. So it's so important that we know what to say, just knowing how to validate, how to support, and hopefully, if it's something so far out of your expertise that you really need to refer out, making sure that the person doesn't feel uncomfortable because you didn't respond with compassion and that you just froze and maybe blew it off a little bit. How we respond can impact everything in someone's comfortability to ever talk about it again.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that was said beautifully. So if you can just acknowledge and validate, and if it is really outside of your wheelhouse, just say, I am going to find someone great for you to talk to about that. And if you and I want to talk about getting big concepts, I'm happy to do that, but I want to find someone that's really skilled in this area for you as well. But thank you for telling me. Make sure that you say, thank you for telling me, and validate them.
That is such a perfect response.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that for people listening who maybe have never talked about it with a therapist before and are maybe uncomfortable or unsure of what to say, can they say it? Do you have any advice for a survivor?
Yeah, so I would say, I love that you and I got to talk about some of the symptoms today. So if you are a survivor who experienced sexual trauma and you have never talked about it and you've just been trying to get through life, but there's symptoms coming up. So maybe you're unable to maintain a healthy relationship, or maybe there is disordered eating or chronic pain issues, stomach issues, nightmares, whatever the thing may be. If you are at a point where you're like, yes, I'm connecting the dots between my sexual trauma and the things in my life that aren't working now, finding a therapist to talk to could be just, I mean, it could change everything for you. So if you need to find a therapist, there's a couple different ways to do that. Or if you have a therapist and are trying to bring it up, I think it would be with that, leading with the symptoms that you have discovered are connected to your sexual trauma. Talk to your therapist about that and say, I think these are connected to what happened to me 10 years ago, or I think these are connected to what happened to me 20 years ago. And by the way, on that note, it is never too late. I'm working with a gentleman who was sexually abused around 9, 10 years old, and he didn't start talking about it until he was 60.
It's never too late to get support and get help, and it can get better. And I think, kind of like you said, way in the beginning, sometimes we just feel uncomfortable and we don't know. So if it doesn't really come up and you don't maybe connect the dots or realize or feel safe enough to explore that uncomfortable feelings until way later, it doesn't mean that you're stuck with it forever because you never had talked about it before. You can talk about it 5 years later, 10 years later, a day later, or 5 decades later. It's always going to be valid. It's always going to be important.
Yeah. And I think the other thing I'd just like to talk about today, the third part of the protocol. So we've got control, pleasure. The last piece is connection. So that connection piece is really about, sexual trauma happens in relationship, and therefore it has to be healed in relationship. Even if it was a date rape or something where you didn't really know the person, you were still in that experience and that night there was some relationship there. Obviously, sexual trauma doesn't happen just on our own. So this ability to connect with people, trust people, be vulnerable with people, have reciprocal relationships is really that key third piece to moving from surviving to thriving.
That is so important to be able to rebuild that connection.
Yeah.
I wish that there were more conversations like this. I wish more people had access to this kind of information because it's so isolating. It's so isolating when you go through something that no one's talking about and you feel like you're completely alone in it. And maybe people are talking a little bit more about sexual assault or rape these days. But when they're not talking about feeling violated, feeling uncomfortable and unsafe, a lot of people just hide away and think that they're the only ones. So the fact that we're talking about it today and that you're continuously talking about it and offering support is just such an incredible step forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. And again, I feel very grateful to be here. I think one other thing I wanted to talk about are the 4 trauma reactions. So most people know fight, flight, freeze. The fourth one that a lot of people don't know about yet is fawn. So with most sexual trauma, so remember, over 80% is someone known to the survivor. Most sexual trauma is going to be reacted to with freeze or fawn. Most of the time it's not fight. Most of the time it's not running away because those aren't possible. Or again, it's someone we've been dating, it's someone in the family. So it's very unpredictable. So it's going to be freeze, which looks like literally how it sounds. Like your body just kind of freezes. You feel like you can't move. You feel like you can't say anything. You feel like you can't scream. A lot of people say they have an image of kind of like leaving their body and looking down on themselves from an observer perspective. Like they know it's them. They're not delusional. They know it's them, but they just feel completely incapable of moving in any way. The fawn response is freeze, but with a smile. So the fawn response is compliance. It's go along to get along. It's the people pleaser. And the reason the fawn response makes sense in sexual trauma is because if we're nice to our perpetrator, that means we can get out of the situation and not get hurt anymore. So it might look like just, yeah, being compliant, being agreeable. So inside you're shaking and you're really scared, but on the outside, you're playing nice so that you can get yourself out of there.
I had never heard of fawn before. So first of all, thank you so much for bringing that up. And I think that's such a valid experience when we're kind of taught, especially as females, to just obey and be the good girl and smile and just let people do whatever so that you can get through. And that's really hard when we end up in situations where that's our response and that we feel like we have to just smile and get through. And it's terrifying too when you don't know what's going to happen and your only option is to smile and hope that they feel good about what they're doing, maybe, and that you can hopefully get out of there as safe as possible and not in any harm.
Right, right. Not getting hurt any worse. Instead of, like, you can imagine if someone fights back, their perpetrator would probably fight back as well. Running away is just rarely an option. So just kind of getting through it is typically what survivors will do. And fawn could even be like, so let's say someone went out last night and there was a date rape experience and their perpetrator texts them that night or the next morning and it's like, hey, I had a great time. Would be great to see you again. A survivor might text something back like, yeah, it was fun, you too. Or they might just text back, yeah, take care, and not confront it because they just want it to go away.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that a lot of people may feel, or a lot of perpetrators may feel, oh, if they responded and they said it was okay or I enjoyed it, that I didn't do anything wrong. And for them, it gives them that sense of no guilt and that that was okay. And it's so heartbreaking that when we want it to go away, they want it to just kind of go away for them too, and that nothing bad happened, and that what they did was appropriate, and that they can keep doing it because,
No one's confronting them.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
so
it's
hard.
hard. So I guess on that note too, if even if it's not, even if what happened to you, the sexual trauma isn't reportable, meaning that you have no proof, and I'm doing air quotes there, or you did text your perpetrator back, or even you went out with them again. This happens too. Like when you're with someone and they cross a boundary and your self-worth is so low, you don't have great boundaries, you might go out with that person again. So it would be hard to prove this in a court of law, right? I don't like, I love the cases where perpetrators can get convicted. That just doesn't happen that often. So I don't want people to conflate, if it's not reportable, that it still wasn't bad. It still was very, very bad. And the reporting process is very difficult and it's hard to get perpetrators convicted. So what happened to you was bad enough on its own merit. I don't want you to feel like you have to prove it. And if you're a survivor who is like, hey, in order for me to feel empowered, I need to report this, then I want you to go for it.
Yeah, and on that note, if someone doesn't believe you, that does not mean it didn't happen. That does not mean it's not real. It does not mean it's your fault. It does not mean you're being dramatic. It means that that's them. That's them. That is not you, and you still deserve support.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And the system is not set up to support survivors. It's set up to protect perpetrators, as we've been seeing all over the media for since 2017 with Me Too.
Yeah, it's so heartbreaking that a system that's supposed to be meant to protect us is doing the exact opposite.
Yeah, yeah. And again, the prosecutions are few and far between.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
And I've had some cases of people that I've worked with where it has just gone beautifully, and the perpetrators have been convicted. So I just need everyone to hear me say, if you want to report. There is support there through RAIN or your local rape crisis center can get you an advocate to help with that process. So please, if that's something that you feel like you need to move forward in your journey, then anybody will support you that is on the side of survivors.
Can you talk a little bit more about what reporting looks like? I think that a lot of people may feel very intimidated by that because they don't know what it entails. So is that something you could talk about a little bit more?
Yeah, and the way that I would go about it is to find your local rape crisis center, and this can even be virtually. So if you live not near a major city, but find a local rape crisis center, and they could work with you virtually, so via Zoom, and get you connected to your local police department, help you make the report, and really they have advocates to walk through that process with you.
That is incredible. Thank you so much for joining me today for the wealth of knowledge and information you've provided. As we're wrapping up, how can listeners learn more about you, purchase your book, and participate in your healing protocol?
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on. So my website has a lot of information. That's just drhollyrichmond.com. It's drhollyrichmond.com. Instagram, same, drhollyrichmond. Reclaiming Pleasure, the book, I'll hold it up here, is available on Amazon, anywhere books are sold. It's also an audio book, and I have an online course. So if you go to my website, you'll see a link to purchase the online course that I teach 10 modules and walk you through the whole thing. But if you are more of a visual learner and want some exercises and some other grounding techniques, that's all there. If you're interested in working with me, you can message me through Instagram or through my website.
Thank you so much for listening to Normalize the Conversation. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. This podcast is an initiative of Inspiring My Generation, focusing on normalizing the conversation, bringing education and awareness to the forefront, and amplifying global voices to spark change and hope. Inspiring My Generation is a 501c3 nonprofit organization on a mission towards suicide prevention through awareness, conversation, education, and support. Connect with us on Instagram at Inspiring My Generation and visit our website inspiringmygeneration.org to learn more about our work and how you can make a difference.